Hey, everybody, and welcome back. This is the first module of the second course that I am teaching, Strategies in Curriculum Design. And this module is entitled Creating a Positive Learning Environment. Let's jump right in. At the end of this PowerPoint today, you should be able to do the following: explain why community building, classroom routines, and proactive classroom management are essential for successful language learning. You should be able to develop practical and predictable classroom routines that support student learning and engagement, apply proactive classroom management strategies that promote positive student behavior. Importantly, create a welcoming and inclusive learning environment that values students' linguistic and cultural backgrounds. Next, you should be able to identify strategies for building a caring and inclusive classroom community, as well as select icebreakers and community building activities appropriate for different age groups and proficiency levels. And finally, choose age appropriate instructional activities that meet learners' developmental needs. As you can see, we have a lot to cover, a lot to talk about, and I'm excited to jump right into this. So, before you begin, I want you just to think back on your own experience as a student and think about a teacher who was caring. Perhaps she or he made you feel welcomed, valued, or supported as a learner. And I just want you to think back to how he or she did that. What did they do to create that feeling of a caring classroom environment? And then also, what was its impact on you? How did it influence your learning? Secondly, I want you to think about why clear routines and expectations are important for both students and teachers in the classroom. And finally, what classroom management strategy or strategies have you experienced or observed that were particularly effective? And why do you think it or they worked so well? So think through those three important questions and record your answers. And hopefully, this will help start to trigger some of these ideas that we're going to discuss today in this module. So, first, the first days of classes. It's so important when you walk into a new teaching context that you establish a lot about yourself, right? That you're the leader in the classroom, that you are proficient with the subject matter, and that you are going to help your students successfully navigate the work ahead. And so you can do that um, with the help of some strategies. This is a well-known book. It's referred by a lot of educators. It's called The First Days of School. I read it back in my teacher education program years ago. It's by Harry Wong and his wife, Rosemary Wong. Now, they were elementary school teachers, so a lot of the routines and procedures and strategies might seem to you to be more oriented towards younger learners, but I can tell you that I successfully applied a lot of these to my high school classroom that I taught as a new teacher. So I know a lot of you are new teachers, and classroom management is a very important component of the work that you do in the classroom. And depending upon the context in which you find yourself, you may need to lean on some of these procedures and strategies to help you be successful with classroom management. Those of you that are working with adults, it's less likely that you're going to need so many of these strategies, but even so, it's helpful for you to think about how you want to start, what's important to you in terms of classroom behavior, disruptions, etc., and to make those clearly known. So, students are forming impressions about you right away. The moment that you communicate with them, perhaps via email prior to the class, or as they walk into your space for the first time. They've number one want to know if you like them. That's so important, right? All students truly want their teacher to like them. So they're going to be trying to figure out, are they going to feel welcomed and valued in your classroom? What kind of classroom is this going to be that you have? What's expected of them? Is it safe to participate? Is it safe to make mistakes? And then whether or not they believe that they're going to be successful. And that would lead to their motivation. So if you want to use or pick up this book as a resource, there's a lot of used copies. There's also a lot of free materials online if you want to search for this text. Especially if you find yourself working with younger learners, this would be very valuable. So, as the teacher, I just want you to remember that you are the pilot of the ship, okay, or the pilot of the plane. Just like when you're on an airplane, you don't want your pilot to be wishy-washy about their next decision or course of action. They want you to be definitive and to have their best interests in mind and to make a decision and to follow through with it. Same in the classroom, right? You are the pilot of this ship. So you are responsible for establishing classroom routines, participation expectations, whether or not you want everyone participating in full group or small group activities, behavioral expectations. For example, even with adults, is it appropriate for them to answer a phone call in the classroom or should they take those outside? What happens if they're arriving late? All of those kind of expectations. Communication norms that has to do with how you want to communicate with students, maybe before class or after class or via email or other modes of communication. For example, with my adults, I use a lot of WhatsApp groups because they tend to like to communicate in that way with a group chat. But that's up to you how you want to establish those. You also are going to establish how the teacher responds to mistakes. Is this a safe, low effective classroom where students can create with language and try new things out? Or is this one in which they would be punished or ridiculed for making a mistake? And then finally, the respect between classmates. This has rarely been a problem for me, but it could potentially be in that, the expectation that all classmates treat one another kindly, respectfully, and that, we're here as a community of learners to support one another in our goal of learning language. Okay, let's go forward. So it's important to establish predictable routines in your classroom. This helps students feel at ease. It actually lowers their affective filter. It's needed for all ages, all levels. And so, depending upon your own teaching context, as you think through where you might be teaching in the future, you should have a minimum, have at a minimum these predictable routines for these times. So, what happens when students arrive to class? Is there a short activity that they can get started with? What is it that you expect them to do? To sit down, get their materials? You should always provide an agenda, including an essential question or EQ, objective for the class, that it's posted in the class and it's read aloud. You should have some predictable routines for transitions in terms of you anticipating materials that are needed, giving directions first, telling students how long they will have or what to do if they have questions before allowing them to move. That will make that work much more successful. Giving and listening for directions, these should always be posted, read aloud. And then moving about the room. How much distraction can you tolerate as a teacher? What's the policy for going to the bathroom, sharpening pencils, collecting materials? What will you feel comfortable with? So these predictable routines not only help students feel at ease and, safer in your classroom, like you are that capable pilot in the room, but they also contribute to a sense of community of classroom and sets the tone and the expectation that, we're not there to waste time, as we know that time is, very precious, especially for working adults who are balancing so many things and trying to learn a new language. And so we want to be respectful of everyone's time and not have distractions that take away from that. I will just add here that I didn't mention in terms of distractions, you also want to think about how you will deal with the challenge that happens when your students, if they're adults, bring their children. So, is that allowed? Is there materials for those children? Is there childcare for those children? Um, you know, because I will tell you that that can tend to be very distracting, not only to the learner themselves, but to the other learners in the classroom. Okay, so good classroom management, we know that it establishes trust and relationships. You want to be sure that you have also created a good lesson plan, that you have thoroughly planned, you have enough activities to fill the time, always having more activities than you probably would have time for, so that if time allows you, don't just, not know what to do, and that you use a pace that fits. that of students' interest, motivation, and proficiency level, providing smooth transitions between activities, and always having a very solid opening and closure to your classroom. You also determine how your classroom is set up, the arrangement of the classroom. Do you want your desks in a circle? Do you want them in straight lines? Do you want small group desks, right? And just making sure that that fits the expectations of the classroom. And then finally, control for those distractions by setting expectations and just be really clear and upfront. There's a lot of varieties of classes. If your class isn't the right one for students, they can always search for a different option. Okay, now, once you establish good routines and procedures for, a safe learning environment, safe and effective learning environment, another thing you really want to think about is this idea of belonging. Belonging doesn't just happen by accident, right? It needs to be something that is thoughtfully created through procedures, expectations for students, how they work together, what you communicate yourself as the teacher. And so we know that belonging is essential before learning, and that students learn best when they feel like they belong. So it's really important that you are communicating messages like you are welcomed here and you are valued. Your language and culture are assets. Mistakes are an important part of learning and should be done. Everyone can contribute, and we are a learning community that supports each other. So along that line, your reading for this module has to do with caring, and it comes from the work of Nell Noddings, who's well known for her work with caring. Care theorists emphasize that teachers and students first need to form a relationship of caring and trust. This is called confianza in Spanish. Maybe you've heard that word. But this is something that is across cultures necessary for students to feel valued and ready to learn in your classroom. Nell wrote, without imposing my values on another, I must realize that my treatment of him, the student, may deeply affect the way he behaves in the world. And I think this just really speaks to the power of the teacher, and you might underestimate how important you are in the lives of your students, but I can, really assure you that they are putting forth the commitment and the time to come to your class, and that means that it's important to them. So how you interact with them will have a good impact as well on their future. So the teacher has to enter into a caring relationship with the student in which he or she is able to respond to what the student needs, right? Not just force their will on the student, right? As if you're caring for their success. But you really do have to meet students where they're at and adjust your instruction for their needs. So, from time to time, as you begin your teaching, I just want you to ask yourself this question. Do my students know that I care about them? And if you think they do, how might they know that, right? How have you shown them that? Okay. Good. So let's move forward. One way to show that you care about your learners is to learn a little bit of their L1 or maybe include their L1 in your classroom when it makes sense. This is obviously something even more important to do when you are teaching English here in the United States. So students who are immersed in the US culture are immersed in English, but their L1 is just as important. And so in our classroom, do not be afraid to incorporate that. You might have it on the wall, like you see in these examples. You might be able to use it on your PowerPoints or in your speaking with the students. And it's not, expected that you know every L1 of your students, but perhaps you can learn a few words of each of their L1 or invite them to contribute to, the materials in the classroom by adding their L1 or going home and asking their parents to help them write the L1 on those materials. So it's a great way to honor their funds of knowledge. Remember, we talked about that that's their repertoire of knowledge and experiences that they bring to the classroom. Another thing that is, fun to do, but also just important in terms of bringing in some humor, movement, lowering the affective filter in the classroom, is to have some icebreakers or community building activities. And there's a few examples here, but we have so many more ideas. And one of your assignments is to contribute to this list of icebreakers. You can find one online, you can come up with your own, but you are going to add that to our growing list of resources. But just a few that I love that I've used over the years. One is the index card activity, which you've seen modeled in another class, I believe. And that's where every student receives a different interview question and they walk around, asking each student in the class that question. So, for example, I might have the question, "Where are you from?" And I go to all my classmates and I ask them, "Where are you from? Where are you from?" And on the back of the card, I write where each student is from. So, Alex is from Spain, and I would write their name and the country that they're from. At the end of that time interviewing students, we share out the answers that were received by the interviewer. So, how many students did they find from China? How many students from Mexico, etc. And the teacher can maybe write that up on the board or just discuss it. Another fun activity that involves movement and music is a snowball fight where you I usually have my students write a question on a piece of paper, crumple it up. So they might ask just a basic question about what are your favorite hobbies, or what do you do in your free time, or what do you hope to do in 5 years, a question like that. They crumple it up, we turn on the music, they throw the snowballs back and forth until the music stops. They have to find a snowball, open it up, and answer it for the class. So it's a lot of fun and there's some movement involved. The penny activity is one in which I pass out pennies to my students, dig those out, and they look at the date on the penny and they have to tell in the class something significant that happened in that year of their life. So it's kind of a nice way to learn a little bit more about them. And then the toilet paper roll, you just pass around a toilet paper roll to the class and you say, just gather, a few sheets from the toilet paper roll and don't tell them how many. And then based upon how many squares they've chosen, they have to tell one new thing about themselves. So the more that they take, the more that they have to say about themselves. And it ends up being a lot of fun. So many more ideas on that icebreaker sheet. So I encourage you to look for those, search for, keywords. You want to see if that's already been shared, but lots of great, great things there. So another way that you can show students that you care is by choosing age-appropriate activities. We know that all students need movement and all students need interaction with their peers. Remember that students tend to learn more from each other than they do from you. So the interaction with others is just imperative for the time in the classroom. And so, just keeping in mind that we have to remember that rule of 1 minute per year of students for concentration. So working with young learners, you have to be very cognizant that their time concentration is going to be also limited. And then also adjusting production expectations according to the level of proficiency. With beginner learners, remember that it's common to have a silent period where they might not be ready to produce, but this does not mean that they aren't learning or absorbing the language that is being spoken in the classroom, or the language that is being provided in the classroom. Um, and so there's ways to have students participate without oral production. Maybe it's a checkbox, maybe it's a thumbs up, thumbs down, maybe it's pointing to a picture or manipulating something. I recall one time I was working with my lower level Spanish students. I was teaching Spanish at that time, and they had like a little person that they had to place in different rooms of the house to show that they understood the words that they were hearing. But it was a beginning portion of that unit, and so they weren't yet asked to produce the names of the rooms. That worked really nicely. And then always, just like we talked about as being a reflective and critical practitioner, you want to reflect and adjust your instruction accordingly as you get to know your learners even better. Okay, just a reminder, because repetition builds retention, that we are still thinking about, as we're talking about, setting the stage and providing this positive learning environment, that we're going to continue to use our best practices, which are incorporating authentic materials and realia, contextualizing teaching in the target culture, the English speaking culture, and always incorporating communicative language teaching tasks. So just want to plug those again, that this also goes hand in hand with providing a positive learning environment for your students. This is one of my favorite examples from several years back, early in my teaching of English at Wake Tech Community College with adults in the evenings. Look how cute they are. I had them write poetry on fruit. I brought in the fruit for them. So they had to, smell it, touch it, taste it, and then incorporate that into their poems. So a lot of realia with the real fruits. They were creating posters, doing a gallery walk, walking around, reading what their other classmates had written about that. And that was following Neruda's Ode to an Onion, if you're familiar with that poem. Contextualizing teaching and learning in the target culture. I think this is one of the, most fun things about teaching is sharing our culture. So, of course, most of us are probably from like a US based culture. That's where our English is from. But you could also share the context and the culture of British English or Australian English, to name a few places. But just thinking about, as you plan a unit of study, how can you also incorporate culture? Is it like, talking about shopping experiences in the US, like the grocery stores, or what it's like to go to a mall? What about meal expectations or times of meals, foods involved with meals? Maybe clothing shopping or going to the doctor, navigating the healthcare system in the United States. What's it like applying for work here in the States? What about directions around town or using public transportation or even going to like local parks in the area? So, whenever possible, just incorporating that into our teaching. Remember, it's kind of a way of incorporating content and language together. Um, Without it having to be like an academic content, right? That can really, enrich your teaching as well. And then we know that communicative language teaching tasks, this should start to sound, um, you know, routine to you and not a surprise, that this needs to form the base of all language teaching, letting go of what we call the Atlas complex. Students are not coming to your class for you to speak English. Students are coming to your class so that they can speak English and practice English. So you have to let go of that ego that you're the most important person in the classroom, because you truly are not. You're right. The students are, and you're there more as a facilitator than as a person who is providing all the input, all the expertise, all the knowledge in the classroom. So reducing teacher talk is your goal. And if you're observed and you are talking more than your students, absolutely your observer is going to say, there's something not right here. Your students are not talking more than you. Okay. Allow those students to take on a more active role during the class time. So as you choose your activities, you always have to ask yourself, is this activity meaningful? Are students communicating with one another? Does it connect with their home experiences? Is it appropriate for their age and proficiency? And does it encourage interaction? So important for us. So, with that, that is the end of our module on creating, setting up this positive learning environment for your learners and kind of starting off from day one, how important that is. So, we will continue to explore these questions through your reflection and the discussion post, and I look forward to hearing your own thoughts on these important topics. Okay, see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye bye.